ಭ್ರಷ್ಟಾಚಾರ ವಿರುದ್ಧದ ಅಣ್ಣಾ ಹಜಾರೆ ಉಪವಾಸ ಸತ್ಯಾಗ್ರಹ 12ನೇ ದಿನಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾಲಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಸತತ ಉಪವಾಸದಿಂದಾಗಿ ಅಣ್ಣಾ ಅವರ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ಹದಗೆಟ್ಟಿದೆ.
Madam Speaker, I seek your indulgence to request the sequence of events.
ಸಂಸತ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಣಬ್ ಮುಖರ್ಜಿ ಮಾತನಾಡುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದರ ನೇರ ಪ್ರಸಾರ ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ.
We are today on 5th of April 2011. Sri Anna Hazare went on fasting, went on indefinite fast. Oral correspondences, of course, between government representatives and his representatives took place. And ultimately, on 8th April 2011, government constituted a joint drafting committee consisting of 5 nominees of Sri Anna Hazare, including himself, and 5 nominee ministers appointed by the government to prepare a draft of the Lokpal Bill. Sri Hazare ended his fast on 9th April 2011. The joint drafting committee met 9 times during April to June 2011. In the first meeting of Joint Drafting Committee on 16th April 2011, preliminary discussions were held to draft the legislation for Lokpal. During the second meeting of the committee, 40 basic principles and the statement of object and reasons were circulated by Sri Anna Hazare's team, which formed the basis of discussions in subsequent meetings of the committee. There were extensive deliberations on these basic principles, wherein the scope and vision of the proposed Lokpal were discussed. Out of the 40 basic principles, we had agreement on 20 issues. We had agreement with the editorial changes on 7 issues. On 7 issues, we had agreement in principle subject to further discussions. That take into account 20 plus 7 plus 7, 34. There were divergences of the views between the representatives of the government and the representatives of the civil society on the vision and scope of the Lokpal on 6 major issues. I would like to explain these 6 major issues. Should one single act be provided for both the Lokpal in the center and Lokayukt in the state? Would the state governments be willing to accept a draft provision for the Lokayukt on the same lines as that of the Lokpal? Should the Prime Minister be brought within the purview of the Lokpal? If the answer is in the affirmative, should there be a qualified inclusion? Third issue was, should judges of the Supreme Court and High Court be brought within the purview of the Lokpal? Fourth issue was, should the conduct of the members of Parliament inside Parliament, speaking and voting in the House, be brought within the purview of the Lokpal? This protection to Lok Sabha members, Parliament members, are provided under Article 105, Clause 2 of the Constitution. Fifth issue was whether Articles 311 and 320, Clause 3, Subclause C of the Constitution, notwithstanding members of a civil service of the Union or an All India service or a civil service of a state or a person holding a civil post under the union or state be subject to inquiry and disciplinary action, including dismissal, removal by the Lokpal, Lokayuks, as the case may be. What should be the definition? Last point was, what should be the definition of the Lokpal, and should it exercise quasi-judicial powers also, or delegate these powers to its subordinate officers? Because it was agreed that Lokpal would be totally independent organization, it would have its own setup, officers will be appointed by Lokpal, and the expenditure of the Lokpal will not be voted by the Parliament, it will be charged as the amount spent by the Supreme Court are charged, not voted by Parliament. On 31st May 2011, I wrote to the presidents of various political parties and the chief ministers of the states, soliciting their views on these 6 contentious issues. Responses were received from 25 chief ministers and 6 party presidents and leaders. I would like to give some extract from these letters, because all these letters are in the domain of the public knowledge. It is in the website of the Department of Ministry of Personnel and Public Grievances. BJP President, in his letter dated 2nd June 2011, I am quoting a few lines, expecting political parties to give their views to a drafting committee comprising of civil society representatives, or for acceptance or otherwise would be upsetting the constitutional propriety, where parties, parliamentarians and the Parliament have the last word. They are decision makers and not suggestion givers. Unquote. General Secretary of CPI stated, as a political party, they will most certainly state their views and suggestions during the discussions on the bill within the Parliament. President of BSP expressed her inability to respond to the issues raised, as no BSP representative had been included in the discussions of the JDC. She also stated that in parliamentary democracy, the bill has to be examined by the Parliament and the Standing Committee, where detailed discussions are held. General Secretary of Samajwadi Party, in his letter, stated that government was holding a direct discussion with the so-called representatives of the civil society in the JDC. On the other hand, leaders of the political parties have been sent a questionnaire. This was not acceptable to the Samajwadi Party, and hence they will not send any reply. The Joint Drafting Committee concluded its deliberations on 21st June 2011, and both sides exchanged their drafts for the Lokpal Bill. Both these drafts are forwarded to the government for further action. To solicit the views of the various political parties, after this, an all-party meeting was convened on 3rd July 2011. In course of discussions, the representatives of the various political parties emphasized, we have summed it up, 1. Supremacy of the Constitution of India has to be maintained. Institutions of democracy cannot be undermined, and the checks and balances visualized in the Constitution cannot be adversely affected. Laws have to be made by parliamentarians who are elected representatives of the country. Few nominated members of the drafting committee cannot have precedence over elected members of the Parliament. On the conclusion of this meeting, it was unanimously resolved, I quote, that government should bring before the next session of Parliament a strong and effective bill following the established procedures, unquote. Exactly we did the same. Following the established procedures, brought the bill, introduced, whether it is strong or effective, that is your judgment, you will decide. And it was introduced on 4th of August. This meeting was followed informally by round of consultations by some of my colleagues, including myself, with not all, but some political leaders, and their inputs were also incorporated in the bill which has been introduced in the House. In pursuance of the decisions of the all-party meeting, government worked out on the draft Lokpal Bill prepared by the Joint Drafting Committee, and after following the formal process of interministerial consultations and cabinet approval, bill was introduced in Parliament on 4th of August